The obvious question for a podcast titled The Science of Physical and Mental Recovery, can we start by your definition of what recovery is? And can I pull on that thread a little bit more? Can you explain the delicate dance between stress and recovery?
That's such a good question. Opening question is a good one. And part of the reason it's a good one is because there really isn't a unified definition around what recovery is. And it depends on who you talk to. So if you talk to, say, a physiotherapist, recovery will be around recovery from an injury, for example. But when we talk recovery in my world, we're really talking about, particularly from an athlete perspective, bringing the athlete back to balance. So if we think of an athlete having a stress or a fatigue response, which we'll get to, what we want to do is bring them back to the level that they were beforehand. And we want to do that from both a physical and a mental perspective. So we want to target both physiology and psychology. So that's the way that we think of recovery, is bringing an athlete back to balance or restoring them to where they were before they either started a training session or they started a competition. That dance that you talk about between stress and recovery is really interesting, because we know
that dance is the underpinning of yours and my careers. So if it was simple to explain, if we could package it, Shona, gosh, you and we'd be doing this on a yacht in the Mediterranean. People buying our definition of stress recovery simplified.
Wouldn't it? And then if we could measure it simply, even better, we'd have 3 yachts. But yeah, essentially the idea is that, and if we're thinking again about this idea of homeostasis, that there's a deviation from that, there's a breakdown. And whether that might be stress, that might be fatigue, whatever it might be, there's a decrease away from normal, from neutral. And then recovery is essentially that concept of bringing it back. And when I talk to athletes, I talk about this all the time, and I talk about this idea that the training and the stress and the fatigue, etc., is important, but you can't just do that. The magic happens and the goodness happens in the recovery and the restoration. So you can't have one without the other. Getting the right amount of each is an art form. I wouldn't say it's a skill. I think it's a real art form, because I don't think there's any real calculations or maths that you can do to make it work. But it's that combination of the two, of the stress and the fatigue and the recovery, that makes or creates the adaptation or the overall improvement over time.
I was listening to a podcast on the real science of sport where Professor Ross Tucker outlines the confusion around recovery. So let's have a listen to an excerpt from that, and then you can pick up and try and help us, Shona.
Essentially, our understanding of recovery is it allows essentially for adaptation. Is that anything? It doesn't feel like that even says that in that explanation.
So it sort of does, just using different words, but like re-establishment of performance abilities that can be systematically used to optimize situational conditions, kind of is hinting at that. But I think, the first prerogative here is to redefine recovery in a way that is digestible and can be understood, because everything flows from it. So
how would you define recovery then?
If you got sick, like you caught the COVID, whatever it was, or you had surgery and someone said, have you recovered? You'd understand instantly what they meant. Am I back to normal? Yeah? Okay. So when you train, you're not having surgery and you're not sick, but you're still under stress. And so recovery is, are you recovered now becomes, have I restored my physiological and psychological, because there's such a thing as mental recovery or psychological, emotional as well, back to where I was before the stress hit me.
Shona, we want our listeners and viewers to hang in there, because we're going to make recovery a hell of a lot more simple than sometimes academics position it to be. You mentioned this in the definition. I loved hearing that you also called out not just physical recovery, but mental recovery. I go back to when I was at the Tasmanian Institute of Sport, 25 years ago. We did recovery, we were starting then, but it was all physical. It would have been ice baths or jumping in the Derwent River, which was like an ice bath in winter, massage, stretching. It really has evolved. So can you branch out and give me an overview of what is physical recovery, what is psychological recovery? Then we'll give our audience a few examples.
Yeah, and I do feel, Andrew, like I may have been partially responsible for some of that focus on the physical aspects of recovery.
It was your fault. Well, you were at the Institute of Sport back then. Yeah, we were following all that protocol.
Yeah, yes. And I think what we've learned over the years is I'm a physiologist by trade, so I'm interested in the physical aspects. And so that's the first area that we kind of went to. And performance, everyone thinks, performance is primarily physical. And so we looked at all these strategies to try and enhance recovery. And part of what I was doing at the AIS in the early days was just doing some research, just to provide some actual evidence that some of these physical strategies that athletes were already using had some evidence base. And, we did that over time and we got some nice information, and we sort of feel like now we've got a little bit of a hold on the types of things from a physical perspective that might work. But then as the more and more you talk to athletes, right, and I know, Andrew, you talk to lots and lots of athletes, and so some of them can be incredibly insightful. And we had this experience where athletes were saying to us, well, look, I feel like we've kind of nailed the physical recovery. Like, I physically feel pretty good, and I feel like we put a lot of effort into that in our training program. But we don't really put as much effort into the mental side or the psychological side of recovery. And so some of them were saying to us, look, I feel physically pretty good, but mentally I'm exhausted, I'm shot, it's towards the end of the season, I've got nothing left mentally to give, but physically I actually feel okay. So then we started to explore some of these more mental aspects of recovery and trying to understand, what does mental fatigue look like? We understand a little bit about physical fatigue. We've been trying to understand it for 100 years, but now we're actually just starting to understand this mental fatigue and then what recovery strategies can work in with that.
If I go to the Oxford Dictionary, it says fatigue is extreme tiredness resulting from mental or physical exertion or illness. And we go a little bit deeper into the archives where people like you live. What I love about your work, though, I digress, you've got a real rich science and academic rigour to what you do, but you make it sticky and normal. Thank you. Because sometimes you talk to an academic, like in that excerpt we just heard, and go, yeah, that sounds really cool. What's that mean? I don't know. Just all these big words. I'll come back to that because I imagine it takes an inordinate amount of time to go from the science to the sticky. So we'll keep that as an open loop. But the two different types of fatigue. Physical fatigue is explained as muscular fatigue or failure caused by the type, intensity and volume of exercise or labour. It's a physiological limitation of energy generation to meet the needs. In other words, your body simply runs out of gas. Mental fatigue is a change in psychological state. Sports science refers to mental fatigue as a psychobiological state caused by prolonged periods of demanding cognitive activity, characterized by feelings of tiredness and lack of energy. How would you explain that to an athlete or a normal person? What's physical fatigue? What's psychological fatigue?
Yeah. And it's interesting when you say that. I think athletes and even the average person understands physical fatigue. They understand that concept of being tired at the end of a training session or at the end of an event if you're an athlete. You understand that physical tiredness that you experience. And when we're talking this mental fatigue, especially with athletes, we have to be really careful that they just don't go straight to physical fatigue because that's what they know and that's what they understand. But mental fatigue, I often just describe it as that it's just sort of like that brain fog. It's just like things move slowly. Your brain doesn't work as fast. It's just you cognitively, or your brain's just a bit foggy and not really working the way that you'd like it to work. I think that's the simplest way that people kind of understand.
Yeah. Can I sense check what I say to athletes as well when I'm talking about the branch between the two? Your brain's not working, but you don't have that sharpness and you can be a little irritable, pissed off. It's the little things that irritate you. Can you go put that back in the fridge? It's war and peace on that as well.
Yeah, and look, I completely agree with that because we did a lot of work in overtraining. In my PhD, it was really around overtraining, like real excessive fatigue. And a lot of the things that were the initial flags were around things like irritability. And people don't want to communicate as much and their style of communication can be really different. So I think, like I said, we spent a lot of time in the periphery in our physical fatigue, but I think there's going to be a lot of magic in that mental and psychological side of fatigue and recovery.
In some of my corporate programs, I teach our executive athletes, it's called LOP, your level of pissed offness. And you say to people, look, I want you to write this down. What I'm going to give you is a way for you to measure your, especially mental fatigue. And, okay, we've been using Whoop bands and Garmin. We've got heart rate variability and heart rate and everything, but LOP and you go level of pissed offness.
Yeah, people get it, right? That
they totally
just makes sense. Yeah, I like it.
there's a distinct difference between physical and mental recovery, but it's not just in two even buckets. They do cross over.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it a little bit tricky and confusing as well in this whole complicated area of recovery, is that you can do some on the physical strategies actually have psychological effects. And so that's where sometimes we feel like, oh, they've been doing recovery right, because they will feel better afterwards. And so we do see fairly profound, if you look at all the recovery research and you look at the one thing that you consistently see from physical interventions around recovery, is they feel better. Perceptually, they feel more recovered. So you might measure a whole lot of performance stuff, might not see much or be highly variable, but you ask them, how do they feel? They all feel better. And it's not just a time effect. There's something else going on. So yes, they are different. And by the definition, even a simple definition, they're different. But I think they really, really interrelate. And that's where it can be really tricky to separate the two when you're talking to an athlete, because you want them to really try and understand where they're feeling the differences. But yeah, definitely connected for sure.
Next question, can you answer the first one as one of the world's leading experts in recovery, having set up the AIS Recovery Centre? And the second one, can you make it sticky for someone listening to this who says, look, I'm not really athletic at all, champ? How do you measure recovery? So first of all, for an athlete, or how would you have someone listening to this measure their recovery?
That's a brilliant question, and there's papers being published and people researching it all the time. The way I think the simplest way, and the way that athletes are leaning towards, and what things that the general population can do as well, is simple questions around like how you're feeling, are you motivated, sore, tired, just basic, how you're sleeping, really basic questions. Because if you're in a lab, I'm going to want to measure your performance. I'm going to want you to do a max effort, and no one's going to want to do that. A max effort will tell me if you're recovered, but no one's going to want to do that in the real world. So we've got to ask simple questions. And the thing that I think we can do, a really simple, easy thing that the average person can do, is say, just for example, from an exercise point of view, say you do the same, you do a 10K run, you do that every Wednesday, pretty consistent doing a Wednesday, and you know how you feel on a Thursday. When you're on that Thursday, if things don't feel like they typically do, usually you feel worse, that might suggest that you haven't recovered. And you might want to look at what you've done in that period of time to see where the issue might be. It might be sleep, it might be nutrition, whatever it is. But I think we can, because understanding recovery is really that period of time post-exercise or post-stress, to have something that you typically do really regularly and just see how you respond to that, and are you responding how you normally respond, is probably the best way of doing that without obviously going into a lab and trying to do a maximum effort.
And what about wearable tech? Where do you sit on measuring heart rate variability?
Yeah, I do like, as a general rule, wearable tech, if used properly. The problem is not everyone uses it properly. And so a lot of people, like even elite athletes that I work with, don't know what some of the measures mean. I've had athletes that have gone to the Olympic Games in Paris, very successful, not knowing if a high heart rate variability is good or bad. I'm like, if I had your heart rate variability, I'd be pretty happy. And so what I think is, now we're in a world where we've got access to more and more information and more data than ever before. And so it's hard for many people to know what to do with that data and how to interpret it. So I think if people know what metrics to look for and their wearables, the ones we trust, the ones we can hang our hat on and say, yep, that's good data, I like it. Where are we not so confident? Some of these readiness and recovery scores that get spat out, not super excited about those.
Marketing meets science, maybe marketing overriding science, someone sitting where you are?
Yeah, a little bit. And sometimes I look at those metrics and I go, yeah, for me, maybe they seem okay, but they're not designed for elites. These are algorithms that are probably created by a Silicon Tech 20-year-old, engineer who's developing some software, right? And so who are working on these algorithms. So they're not designed for an elite athlete or for even potentially a really high, a high performer in the corporate world. So I think we can use them with a bit of a grain of salt. I don't think these types of wearable devices, in terms of the provision of the metrics around recovery and readiness, are overly useful, but I think they're just something that you can keep your eye on. But for there will be people and potentially athletes who shouldn't see those numbers at certain times because they may cause more problems than they should.
I reckon it's closely. The higher you go up, the more it is, because there's non-diagnosed or high-performing anxiety. It can be rocket fuel. But then you give that person a wearable device and then they see, geez, my heart rate is up and my heart rate variability is down. I only got 9,600 steps. I'm 400 below what Andrew said I should see in my deep way. Don't wear it. So there is a certain type of person and athlete that should not wear wearable tech because it brings on anxiety.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And if I ever have athletes say to me that it's making their sleep worse, I'm absolutely, no problem. But I do feel that they still have an issue that needs to be addressed. We don't just say, oh, okay, bye-bye wearable, without putting something else in place to help, to help assist. Because often what I see is when people put a wearable on and they really don't like it, often it's because it's telling them information they don't want to see. They don't want to see that they're sleeping 5.5 hours, or they don't want other people to see they're sleeping 5.5 hours. But there are definitely the genuine, like you say, the ones that really get anxious with the numbers. And with people like that, sometimes we do sleep monitoring where they don't see the metrics themselves until the end when we give them a report or a summary and we take them through it. So it takes away some of that stress and that anxiety around the perfectionism with the numbers.
I think most people listening to this podcast who aren't sleeping well, they know because they feel shit. Their eyes are hanging out. They're irritable. They've got that LOP, level of pissed offness. And for men especially, it's the visceral fat. And when you explain this to a corporate group, you can actually sleep your way. It depends how well I know the group, right? And you've got to be careful in this politically correct world. But I say sleep your way into a pair of budgie smugglers. Now, for a lot of our audience, they're just totally switched off. But if you want a beach body or to look better, for a lot of people, it's actually sleep and start with get that proper metabolic process going, the lymphatic system, hormonal profile. We could nerd out for hours. It makes a massive difference. But there's a lot of people in denial on that.
And it's such an exciting area of research. There's obesity and the lack of sleep. And, you just think, there are definitely hormonal things that change and your metabolism's different, but you just got more time to be awake to eat, And when you're tired, you want to eat. You're tired, you eat different foods. It's clinically shown you want to go eat the simple sugars and the high-fat foods because that converts to serotonin, which converts to melatonin to make you feel good, but doesn't actually in the long run help you out at all.
Tired plus add a little bit of alcohol. Yeah, stuff it. I'll have it. The way people monitor this, one is just running a barometer. How do I feel? Am I waking up and feeling okay? Am I feeling refreshed, recharged, renewed and ready to go? And the second one would be you can add some wearable tech underscore as long as it doesn't make you anxious.
Yeah, 100% great summary. And the only thing I'd add is to really get people to think about, so I do this with sleep, like if you haven't slept well, you can blame, we know that what you do during the day affects your sleep at night. So people always trying to hack their sleep. I'm like, well, you can't really. You're asleep. But what you can do is you can hack your day. And so what you need to do is look back and go, what did I do during the day that maybe influenced negatively my sleep? Was it caffeine? Was it stress? Was it late exercise? And so when you do this monitoring of recovery and you look and you see kind of where you are and how you're feeling, but also have a bit of insight and look back and go, what did I do and can I learn from what I did so that maybe next time I have a better recovery response?
Picking up on that story, it's a beautiful segue, looking in the rearview mirror. I'm going to run by you something that I did with an athlete earlier this week, and you're either going to give me a tick or approval or a big cross. So I'm feeling a little bit nervous, Shona. Had an athlete, won't mention, well, it's a footballer, so leave it open because there's at least 5 types of football if you add NFL. And we've done a review, and he said the first part of his season, he said all the mental skills, he was going beautifully. Now, the mental skills research that I love shows that you get minimum effective dose when you're training mental skills, at about 6 minutes a day. Maximum effect is 25 minutes plus. Now, for most athletes, 10 minutes is sticky. 10 minutes a day of mental skills training by 6 equals, you pause for the athletes, wait for them to answer, most of them say 60. So you're looking at 1 hour a week of mental skills. So this guy, he's a great young lad, and he just said to me, At the start of the season, the first half Maisie, I found it easy, and I was doing more what you and I would say is the cognitive type mental skills. He said the harder ones, like the meditation, the mindfulness, the self-reflection, self-talk, some of the deeper imagery. He said, I got to mid-season, couple of niggles, still playing, lost a couple of games. And he said it was fucking hard to do that. And he said, I thought I was doing it and I just ticked the box. And it made me step back as a practitioner and think, I need to be clearer on this. So I said, look, I'm going to try something with you. Let me know how it goes the next few weeks. Why don't you run a barometer, and we'll call it a mental energy level, every morning when you wake up. And if you're not a 6 or a 7 above, don't go do all the high level shit. So the high level cerebral stuff. He said, so what do I do? I said, well, where have you been? He said, I reckon I've been at a 2 or a 3. I got as low as that, but I'm probably back to a 4 or a 5. So I said, just do the easier stuff, like the morning wake up. So the morning wake up or the morning glory, some of my footballers call it, is they get out and get, it does have a connotation, but just get out and get 10 to 30 minutes of sunshine, walk, just wake the body up and don't get on your mobile phone and push technology back. So it's a biological or a circadian rhythm wake up. Or just do walking on the grass and a walking meditation or some grounding. So I asked him to run that barometer and he said that makes sense. And it's early, I only had a couple of days, but I got a message from him last night and he said, I feel so much better already because I'm not putting that pressure on myself and I know I can do something and I don't have to make it hard. So can you unpack that for me? And what would have you told that athlete maybe differently to what I did?
No, look, I think you've nailed it. And because I think it brings to mind a couple of things. It brings to mind just the whole concept of periodization, right? And when you've got, and I know that I'm heading, that's a real exercise science sort of terminology, but it's this, and the idea is that you phase things in and out. You don't load people for an entire season in the same way, right? There's a recognition and understanding now, and you've just shown it, that cognitively that occurs as well. So sometimes, you see coaches and physical performance staff, manipulate the training over a season, but sometimes you have to manipulate the cognitive demand as well. And that's what we've seen when it comes to some of the mental fatigue work that we've done, is that it can change at different times of the season, particularly when there's lots of other things going on, social commitments, media commitments, sponsorship. Am I going to get my contract signed? Am I going to make the team? And so I think there are definitely times where you say, look, yes, let's just do the easy things that make sense, that you can do, that that you can achieve. And I do that. And I think a lot of people probably do that in their own world, in their own life, and that there's days where you go, I'm just doing the basics today. I'm going to reply to my emails. Hope I don't make spelling mistakes, and that's as good as it's going to get. And then there's other days where you feel like I can smash this out and I'm feeling cognitively great and I'm on the top of my game, and now's the day to write or think.
That's a Brad Cooper limitless day. You take the magic potion and right. You can just bang it out.
Need some of that.
I've just had a massive moment. When you said that periodization, and I was a strength and conditioning coach, exercise physiologist, went into S&C in multiple sports, of course you periodize. I'm going to start doing that on mental skills, and I need to be more mindful of that, to have periods on and off. So I think that conversation earlier in the week and now talking to you, we talk about the natural rhythm. So if I look outside now, the clouds are moving. Later today, the sun will go down. So the sun comes up, the sun goes down. We had this change in season and the deciduous trees lose their leaves. I'm starting to sound like David Attenborough. The tides rise, the tides fall. There's this rhythmic pulse in everything we do. I think building a rhythmic pulse for people listening to this, and I do that with my corporates, work for 10 weeks. This aligns well if you've got kids, school term and then down regulate. I think where I can improve on this is to pulse a little bit more with my mental skills and give players a week off, or maybe just run that mental fatigue model.
The barometer.
Yeah, and if you're feeling
right.
your LOP, level of pissed offness, just go for a walk, take your shoes off.
Yeah, absolutely. And, slight divergence, but did some work with the NFL team once and measuring their sleep, and there was an obscene amount of caffeine being consumed. And so I was like, okay, that's an issue. But then I was like, well, why are they consuming all this caffeine? And you look at what an NFL team does. I mean, they do lots of obviously physical training, but they sit in these rooms and watch video and they learn all these plays, and they're trying to, you've got these young guys that aren't sleeping who are trying to learn all these complex plays in the NFL, and they sit in these dark rooms and they're all nodding off. And if they're not nodding off, then they're consuming caffeine. And so I think, again, this idea, people just think we're loading people with the physical. We're also loading people, athletes, with all this cognitive fatigue. And I often describe it to people when I say the only day of the week I usually don't exercise is a Tuesday. I have an early drive and I leave early and I come home late, and that's the tiredest I am, because I've been on the road for 3 hours, which is cognitively demanding. And we don't consider that about people going to and from work or athletes to and from training sessions that have long drives. I have back-to-back meetings all day, and then I drive home, and that's the tiredest I am all week, and I've done no exercise. And that's how and people get that. They're like, yeah, I know what it feels like when I've had a long drive and my brain's not working as well as it should. So we've got to think of the implications of exercise, but not just that, but now also cognitive load, and that challenge to the brain is really important as well.
Translate that for some people listening, because we have a bunch of leaders in defence, startups, entrepreneurs, and also enterprise business. If you've got board report, which every quarter for a publicly listed company, you've got a quarterly board meeting, you've got a monthly update as well. You will absolutely have days going into that where the cognitive demands on you are massive. Spend more time on that day down regulating. Maybe just do the morning wake up and don't flog yourself from a fitness point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It sounds so obvious, but I think we sometimes get stuck on that treadmill and think, I've got to do the same thing. Just on that NFL example, a team that you were working with as well, the Wallabies. And if you look at a week on a test match, the Tuesday, I call test match Tuesday, and especially your number 10 or the fly half has to know the game plans. I'm even thinking for that, there should be some loading in the day for different positions, because it's cognitively demanding, especially for the link plays at the start of the week. And we say, front load your cognitive skills, but also front load all the game plans as you go into the week. So I think I can even start to think about the adaptation. So if our audience is getting nothing out of this, which I know they are, I've got a parallel pod going. This is really helping me think about how do I map out the periodization with some of the athletes I work with.
And because I always used to think the cognitive stuff and the learning as really related to sleep. So obviously you learn more if you're well rested and you've slept well. And then if you're learning something new and you want to reinforce that, having a nap afterwards is a really good way of reinforcing that learning. And so I always looked at it really, the cognitive stuff from a sleep angle, because they're so linked and so connected. But there's such a strong fatigue link to it as well. And so the timing of when we're doing things in relation to how tired they are, how receptive they are to take things in, and then how well the brain synapses suck up all the information and turn it into memory is really important. So yeah, it's a great way of thinking about it is the ebbs and flows of the cognitive demands.
The pulse, and that's been running through, and this wasn't set up, but just when I listen to you and when I talk, we're even doing that, like we're lifting our hand up, like we look like an orchestra. So beautiful link into psychological detachment. The definition of psychological detachment occurs when you're constantly working or thinking about job-related issues, problems or opportunities after work hours. Now, asterisk, what is work hours for many people? It means leaving the workplace behind at the end of the working day, switching off your work brain and entering recovery stage. When you explain that to most high performers, they go, yeah, I get that. They'll often say, but if I just do a little bit more now, I'll get a head start on everybody else. Do you know Professor Sabine Sanatong?
I know the name and some of the work.
Yeah, University of Mannheim in Germany. She's looked at how you can be a high performer on the job and switch off by maintaining your psychological detachment, as she calls it. 2 studies I want to call out. In one of her studies, participants who demonstrated a lack of psychological detachment from work were prone to exhaustion 12 months later. Sonatag suggests we should use rituals to detach from work in our downtime, especially when demands are high. Proper recovery results in significantly better work engagement. So really interesting. She's showing psychological detachment, different to physical recovery, although related, as you said, leads to higher levels of work engagement or disengagement if you're not doing it. Her second study, I want to highlight, shows how critical prioritising recovery is. This is why we need people like you. The subject's morning recovery level significantly predicted better work engagement, and their work engagement was a predictive of the worker's recovery levels the next day. So there's this reciprocal relationship between engagement and recovery. This finding shows a reciprocal relationship between recovery and work engagement. In other words, the more effectively you can unplug from work and enjoy your downtime, the more engaged and productive you'll be when you're getting back to work.
Makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It all makes sense, and it's all things that I think we should be aiming to do. And it makes me think, of course, my brain goes to the athlete, but it makes me think of people like Simone Biles. Right? How long did she take off? She had the yips. She took some time off and then came back and was brilliant. You look at, and now look at the opposite of that. I look at tennis. Look what tennis is doing. It's a year-round sport now. They don't have any doubt. I mean, unless you're one of the top players and you can choose to take some time away. It is a 12-month of the year sport now, and you can see, and the players talk about it, how challenging that is when they have absolutely no time away, not even for pre-season, right? So let alone time to just disconnect from tennis. So I think we're seeing that more and more now, that there are athletes coming out saying, I need time away, whether that's a large chunk of time and then come back better than ever, or just taking more time away in their weekly, monthly sort of plans. So yeah, I absolutely see that that detachment can be absolutely important for not just for the here and now, but for long-term, health and well-being as well.
Cricket, there's been a lot more cases reported in the media of mental health breaks. I'm walking on a tightrope here, so I'll be very cautious of the wording. I think it's too easy sometimes to just bracket it in a mental health challenge. And I'm not denying that we are, thankfully, especially men, having more conversations when we're struggling. I think that in some of these global sports now, tennis, I'll put cricket in because there's multiple tournaments around the world, they're not having an off-season like they used to. So I think a lot of these challenges, it's not stress, it's actually lack of recovery. And I'll sort of parlay that into a lot of people listening to this, because at least in sport, used to, before it became global and playing all year round, you'd have defined markers. So most sports will have an off-season, then they'll have a pre-season, then they'll have a season. So there's this real seasonal shift. And most sports will have 2 or 3 months off. So one of the challenges of saying, hey, here's Shona what you do in sport and what I do in sport, and then go into a corporate world, they think you're an idiot if you say, here's what you do in sport, we'll do this in the corporate world. Because the athletes you and I work with, they'll train 25 to 30 hours a week, and they'll compete for an hour to 90 minutes, tennis 3 or 4 hours. The corporate audience listening to this, some of them compete for 80 hours plus a week, and they do no training. So I just feel that notion of psychological detachment, especially for people outside of sport, it's so important to have that. Yet so many people don't, because and I've been there, you think, it's Sidious Altius Fortius, I'll blame the little Frenchman, Pierre de Coubertin, faster, higher, stronger.
No, yeah, and you see it, and it's funny because I often... You can see it in other people happening, and it's very difficult, or it can be challenging to get them to put the brakes on a little bit. And often I find, whether it's working with athletes in particular, that when you can have the most engagement and the most success is when the wheels fall off. But you don't want the wheels to fall off, right? You want to get them before that happens. But sometimes they need they need things to fall apart, and then they'll start to listen. But yeah, sometimes if we could just trying these techniques and trying as many ways as we can to encourage them to do these things first, don't get to that point where, now you're really struggling, your mental health's bad, your physical health is bad, and your career is jeopardized because of it.
So I hope we've covered physical and mental fatigue, what it is. We've covered residual fatigue as well. We've looked at psychological detachment. You got a really cool job. Now, and I know that even cool jobs, there's always the stuff you do behind the scenes. That I've often thought about that. Do one of those weeks where you're doing research and writing and all the work, and you're up late at night and do an Instagram post or LinkedIn on that. Hey, everyone, just getting to bed. It's midnight, and you'd lose followers. But the cool stuff you do, like you've worked in NFL, you work with the Wallabies, you work across NRL, you work with some of our Olympic gold medalist athletes. Are you able to tell us 1 or 2 stories of what you've done with athletes to build in some recovery protocols?
Yeah, good question. I think there's probably 2 different angles to it. I think one of the ways that we've done it, and this was the early days, is you bring the facility, or you bring the equipment, or you provide access to recovery. And that's where I found in my experience that, and I'm sure you have too, a lot of athletes can be a little bit lazy. And so if it's there and it's ready for them, then I think access is really important. So giving them or providing them with opportunities and facilities. So it's definitely one thing that I've found just increases uptake extraordinarily, especially if it's a nice facility. And I mean, we upgraded the recovery facilities in the Australian Open and the Rod Laver Arena, and it makes a difference. People want to come in. It's a nice environment.
So can you take the audience through what's in the recovery centre for the Australian Open?
Yeah, so we have ice baths. So there's a couple of sections, but we have ice baths. We have a dry recovery area with, compression boots and a place where they can sort of just relax a little bit. We have massage facilities, etc. as well. But the beauty of a place like an Open is that there's, amazing staff that are there. So there's separate physio rooms. There's an amazing nutrition area. There's a sleep room. So if the players want to go and have a nap, there's a sleep room. So, I mean, that's where things, I think, when you've got resources and you've got space, you can make things happen. So that's the easy stuff, almost like that with the AIS, building the facility. Just tell us what you want. We'll do our best to make it happen within budget. The challenges I find are when you've got people that maybe don't have access to the resources or the facilities or the equipment, or they haven't been educated. Like any time I go to a basketball team, especially in the US, and you've got an Aussie player that came through the AIS system, it's brilliant. They're so well educated. They came through, your Paddy Mills, they come through at 15, 16 years old, and they know all they need to know about recovery, and they turn up in their teams and they teach them what to do. So I think there's the combination of the facilities, but there's really the education, and the younger you can get them, that's another really important thing. But then I guess in terms of lately, I would say the biggest influence that I can have and stuff that I really enjoy doing is the one-on-one sleep stuff with athletes. So when we're talking about they've got some sleep data and they don't know how to fix it, and it's like putting a puzzle together. You're asking them questions about caffeine, about alcohol, about gaming, about early starts and how much they're napping during the day, and that to me is really fun. And you can see when the light bulb comes on and they get it, and that they're going to do the work to change those behaviours. I think that's the really, really fun stuff.
You glossed over the AIS facility a little bit. Can I just tell people what you've actually done? Because you go to the AIS facility. Oh, yeah, did she help, or she looked at the brochure? Your name came up a couple of times a few months ago, which is why I reconnected with you. One was Byron Field, the Wallabies physio. Hello, Fieldy. We'll make sure he gets a shout out. And the other one was Kieran Perkins, head of the Australian Sports Commission. Hello, KP. Were you working at the Institute when Kieran was an athlete?
No, I think he had retired by the time I had started.
Okay, so we're having dinner in Canberra at Chairman Yip, which is a place where all politicians and old men go. And he said, "Oh, do you know Shona?" I said, "Look, I've met Shona years ago, but no, I haven't had a conversation with her recently." He said, "Oh, you should absolutely track it down, because what she set up at the Institute is not only being used for athletes, but when a lot of the poignant and defence, when they go through their protocol, they go back now to the AIS Recovery Centre and you put them back together, were his words, physically, psychologically, emotionally." So do you want to tell us about that, or how much can you tell us about that?
My time there, when I first arrived at the Institute, it was really just about what do we put in a recovery centre? What things can we put in there? And at the time, there's not a lot of evidence base. So I was just like, let's put the things in that we think is going to work and hopefully is not going to be harmful. But I think the real magic of the recovery centre, yes, it was a nice building. It was large. I think we cater for every athlete. They could come in and they could have lots of choices for their recovery options. But I think there was a couple of key things that we didn't plan, but it just happened that I think worked. I think one, the fact that not many coaches and staff went in there. So I think it was a real chance for athletes to mix with other athletes and kind of debrief and kind of chat. And so it was, I think, for them a time of just, a bit of not freedom, but they could just, it's a really nice social kind of hub where they could really communicate with other athletes. And then the second thing that we did was just research. we use the facilities there to really try to answer some of these questions. And I think people, and it was very applied research, and I think a lot of people sort of roll their eyes at research, but what it allowed us to do is understand how these things are working. And if you understand how they're working, you can prescribe them better. So if you know what's happening when you put someone in an ice bath, you can help decide when's the best time to do that. So, the recovery centre was really popular. It was, I think it still is a place that lots of people like to go to. And it's got a bit of that physical recovery, but there's also that psychological element of getting together with your peers and just having a chat.
I'm sure there's a lot of people who are going, yes, Andrew, yes, Shona, this all sounds great. Rigor science. I can go to the AIS. We send our wonderful men and women from the military there as well. But what do I do? Well, drum roll, wizard. We've put together a worksheet. Thank you for helping me update this, because it's been sitting there for 5 years or so. So I've had a worksheet which was recovery points, so weekly recovery points. And I thought, well, I've got to go to the source. I've got to go to Shona and get a blend of, is this based in science? And some of it you told me wasn't. So we scratched some off. But I think most of it was. So we've come up with, and if you go to the show notes, you can get a copy of this, but it's a point system on physical and mental recovery. And the first level, we call this the higher level recovery, 30 to 60 minutes for physical, yoga or tai chi, massage, a flotation tank or a nap, 30 points. For mental recovery at the high level, 30 to 60 minutes, it's a walk in nature, visit the ocean or a creek, go fishing, because there's no G in fishing where I grew up in country New South Wales, or do some gardening. So nature walk, ocean or creek, fishing or gardening, they're all 30 points, and that's for 30 to 60 minutes. So thank you for helping me get a little bit more depth to this model. If we go the mid-range recovery, 15 to 20 minutes, it's a lot of the contrast or heat therapies. So sauna and steam, you get 15 points. A hot tub or a bath, 15 points. And pneumatic compression, in normal language, that's something like Normatec boots, you'll get 15 points. On mental recovery, for the 15 to 20 minute section, it's music or a podcast. So it could be listening to or playing music. We don't get it for recording a podcast. It is when you're listening to a podcast. And if I add some of the psychological detachment, ideally not something you are always doing at work. Cooking is 15 points, and play. So what did we come up with play? I think we had checkers, playing a board game.
Playing cards, those kinds of things.
Cards. I think on my old sheet I had adult play. Adult play as well.
That was in there.
So there's some people that have been going, what, 15 points, woohoo! Okay, and then the lighter level recovery, which is 3 to 5 minutes, and I call this micro recovery or micro doses of recovery. Around the physical, we had cold water therapy, 15 points, meditation and mindfulness, 10 points, breathwork, 10 points. And then under mental recovery, for the micro recovery, grounding, they've been doing this for thousands of years in Indigenous tribes, taking your shoes off and connecting with the earth, 10 points. Hanging out with animals, because we know there's a lot of psychological effects and feel-good effects from animals, 10 points. And reading a book, non-work related, 10 points. So we'll put this in the show notes. It's now typed up beautiful, looks much prettier than when we spoke about it yesterday. I really like now that there's a frame. And I think it was Goethe, the German philosopher, who said all models are fundamentally flawed. This one, however, may have some utility. So I think that's a really good teaching guide. So thank you for helping me sharpen that up.
No, that was great. And I really enjoyed it because I think we sort of talked a bit about it. Like, I definitely come from the science world and we like a bit of evidence, but I also live in the real world and understand that there are things that we haven't researched yet, that we haven't looked at, that we know people enjoy and that we know are beneficial. And I see a lot of these pyramids or point systems or things that are truly physically only focused. And so that understanding of the detachment, the mental recovery is really important. And just thinking about, how do you prioritize these? Which ones are the most important? Which are the ones that people have to set out and make an effort to do versus that you can just do simply? And also the other thing I like to think was thinking about there's things that will be relaxing and mentally recovering for some people and stressful for others, so there's things in there that, it's a bit of choice, which I think is really important as well.
And if you have a bit of gamification, or at least give a point system, people can go, I've got a little bit of a frame from it.
Yes, yeah, that's right. I mean, we don't really know, the difference in terms of some of these. We've never really compared a lot of these recovery strategies. But I think in terms of a point system is a nice way of just encouraging people to think about it and prioritize and try to add up different types of strategies to get their total amount.
It's a really good practical way, and it's not didactic. You have to do this. What I think this will do for our coaches and what I think this will do for our audience is go, yeah, you can perform at a high level. I used to teach recovery. Hey, have a proper off-season or holiday. Yes, do that once a year. Hey, every 3 weeks, try and have a mini break. Yes, still do that. Hey, try and get some fun and colour in your life and a few hobbies. Yes, still do that. Try and get good sleep 6 nights a week. Yes, do that. But everyone's so busy. I think if you break it down to the micro, here's what you do on the intra or daily. I've just seen a real shift when you do this because it energizes people and it gives them agency, or the self-efficacy Albert Bandura talks about, that you have the ability to adopt this. And where I used to go was reverse engineering from the big recovery to the small. I've found just getting the daily micro gives people more agency to then go bigger.
Yes, and it's achievable. You would hope that everyone has 3 to 5 to 10 minutes a day that they can integrate something into their life.
I say when we run these executive and our leadership programs, if you don't have 3 minutes to recharge on the run, I can't help you. You mentioned before one of the unexpected consequences of the recovery centre at the AIS was getting the coaches and support staff out of there so the players could have psychological detachment. Now, I want to get them back in the room because I think it's an area that is missed. I think coaches and support staff in elite sport spend so much time getting that stress recovery dance right for their athletes, yet they do sweet FA for themselves. From a personal 100%. Level as well. End of Super Rugby season, there will be 15 test matches in 4.5 months in multiple countries and across 8 or 9 time zones. Now, when I say that to you, what is your exercise physiology recovery expertise? Are you flipping?
I'm like this. It's funny. Yes, I'm flipping because it's exciting, right? And you think the country that does that the best, it's like when you go to an Olympics and it's hot and it's humid and it's polluted and it's like, that's your opportunity, right? You get people, if you can nail that better than the other countries, you've got yourself a little competitive advantage. Because yes, that's a lot. And obviously thinking about the players, there's demand of play and the contact, etc. as well. So it's like the perfect storm for being an athlete. But then obviously bringing the coaches and the support staff back into the room, as you say, I think we have neglected them for way too long. I now do some education and some work with some of the newer developing coaches in preparation for 2032. And there are a lot of athletes I used to work with, and it's hilarious because they're like, we should have listened to you back then. And I'm like, yes, you should have. And there is now, I would say, across Australia, a real focus on educating the new coaches coming through, and not just about sport, but about how to take care of themselves a little bit better. And I think coaches and support staff, and I think we chatted about this the other day, is that what happens when you're traveling with a team and you want to go to the gym and you want to train? What time do you do that? Do you even get to do it?
5 a.m. or 10 p.m. in between the window?
Yeah, so your sleep's almost nothing and you feel guilty. You feel guilty if you're out exercising and someone sees you in the middle of the day. So it can't be in the middle of the day, right? And so I think sometimes it's this, we have to change the culture a bit, that it's okay for us to take care of ourselves if we're out traveling with a team or we're working with a team. Because the times I've monitored sleep in coaches and support staff, it's often been worse than the athletes.
Like me, you can see that there's a major opportunity, and you said the team or the country that gets that right gets a major opportunity or a major advantage. We've done it for so long with athletes. Now, if you think about a campaign or a season, look at a World Cup in any sport. You can be away for 3 or 4 months. So look at Ashes cricket tour. In England, you'll be away for 3.5 months. And in the past, we've done nothing for coaches. Who makes selection? Who controls a lot of the leadership groups and the agenda and the culture? Coaches. So if you're getting tired and irritable and shitty at the end of the tour, it would just make sense to totally put this into practice. Totally.
100%. Couldn't agree more. I mean, you look at communication styles. There's so many things that change when you're tired or when you're grumpy, your decision making, all those kinds of things. So, I think looking at the coach as a performer in their own right, I think is the direction that we should. I think people do that to a certain extent, but we need to do it more, and we need to be okay with putting a real focus on them as performers.
Can I broaden that for our audience and say, look at the people leader as a performer? So anyone who is in a position of influence, you need to be doing this as an inverted commas coach. A really interesting article, the recovery umbrella in the world of elite sport. Do not forget the coaching and performance staff. Long quote, but I'll cut it back. Recovery is recognised to be an integral component to assist athlete preparation in the restoration of physical and mental function, and subsequently performance in elite team sports athletes. However, the importance of recovery in team staff members, sports coaches and performance staff in elite sports appears to be a forgotten element. Given the unrelenting, intense nature of daily task and responsibility of team staff members, the elite sports environment can predispose coaches to increased susceptibility to psychosociophysiological fatigue burden and negatively affect health, well-being and performance.
That is so interesting. And I 100% agree with that. And that's a really interesting paper, that one. And I think we can look at recovery for coaches and support staff. It might be exercise might be the recovery for them, right? Might be keeping them healthy. And exercise might be an opportunity to be away from the demands of the sport. You know, I like that paper. It also talks about family being a protective factor. You typically, when everything's going good. And so
I like it.
not when things are going bad.
That's for someone with experience. When I go home to 4 kids and my partner, when it's all going great, it's recovery. When I go back and it's not, oh my God, I go to work for recovery.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm taking it back to the athlete here, but sometimes you talk to, and I'm sure you would have seen this with the football players that you work with. Some of them say they sleep so well when they're away because they're away from, like you say, the kids, the dog, the stress, the life.
I travel a fair bit. I sleep much better away.
Better.
Much
Yes.
better. Much.
Yes. And that's what a lot of people say. And then others are a bit like, oh no, I kind of miss, I'm not used, this is different. I miss and so this idea that you're going to have different people and work, corporates, a lot of them, like yourself, you travel a lot for work, right? And so there's challenges to that. And so understanding, is that something that works in people's favour sometimes or is that not? But yeah, I really like that paper of putting the coaches and the support staff in the picture.
We'll make sure there's a link, Wiz, in the show notes for that paper as well. I just want to pick up something you said, that often coaches and support staff will feel guilty exercising during the day. I reckon I was there back when I was with the Australian cricket team, going back 15 years ago. Now, though, I don't feel guilty at all. In fact, if I'm on a tour, and obviously you do what you're meant to do because it's long days, but when we've got a window, I won't hide it. And I've even had some players go, oh, it's good that you exercise. So for coaches listening to this who are thinking, oh, I can't show them, flip the mindset, because when you're working with an elite team, you don't have to have been an elite athlete. You don't have to have elite fitness. I think, though, it just helps. One, for your own cognitive function, well-being. There's loads of benefits, longevity. But I think it's role modelling. And I really think for coaches listening to this, people leaders, when we broaden it, when you're seen to get that dance, the delicate dance between stress and recovery, and other people looking at you going, oh, okay, so it is important.
Yes.
It's role modelling.
Completely agree. And there's someone I worked with a number of years ago, but you couldn't book a meeting with them between 12 and 1. And it wasn't lunchtime, it was exercise time. And you just knew. And I thought it was great. I was like, absolutely good on you. And that does, as you say, role model for other people. And so when people are leaders of an organisation, for people to know, look, it is, not only is it okay to take an hour out of your day to go and do some exercise, it's really important, and it's probably actually really beneficial for the organisation that you've got people that are actually exercising and healthy, and probably leading to increased productivity by taking that 1 hour out of the day to exercise.
And there's much less likelihood you're going to be an arsehole later that day.
It's also very important.
Imagine that, a book. How to not be an arsehole of an afternoon. And you open up and the book says, exercise at lunchtime. That's it.
Yeah. And I remember reading, and I can't tell you where it was from, but I remember reading about the benefits of exercise in terms of the parts of the brain that are activated when you exercise are also similar parts of the brain that are activated when you're stressed, and it counteracts it. So, I know for me that if something's really hectic in my life, I just walk. not a fast walk, no, I just like to walk, and I find that's really, really good for my brain to
One
get
of
out
my
and about.
favourite brain compounds is neurotropic growth factor. So the beautiful stimulation you get. And if you have a block in your brain, you're not sure. When I'm writing a book or I'm putting together a program, because now it's interesting, Ethan, saying that. The old days, we just used to write books. Now it's courses. So it's really digital books. When I get I can't work it out, I'll walk. I take my mobile, but I don't have it on. It's just my notes section. The amount of times I've had when I'm walking, I cannot tell you.
Yeah. And I'll often do that too. If I have to sit in a meeting where there's lots of people and I know I don't have to speak, I'll just put headphones on and I'll be out. I'll listen to the meeting, but I'll just go out for a walk and try to, what I call it, habit piggybacking, just trying to achieve a couple of things at the same time. If you're really time poor, you're not going to get any exercise in. Just find a way, find somehow in your day to make it happen.
And linked in with that psychological detachment, my understanding of this when they look at fMRIs, functional magnetic resonance imaging, you and I now, I hope we're both in beta, where we're thinking, agitating, pulling models. Even you said there's a research paper that shows you're engaged. We want people to go alpha, and that's that beautiful pulse when you oscillate and get some of that micro recovery. At least you're going alpha. And that's when I explain that, Shona, people are like, what do you mean? I go, well, alpha is a form of daydreaming. So I know that when you do some breath work or maybe just some of the other stuff, it might be a physiological sigh or some of the 3 to 5 minute activities just around that psychological detachment and parasympathetic activation, the two parts of down reg. And your brain just drops for a little bit and then you come back at a higher intensity. So it's again that pulsing. We need to learn this at school, seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know how that happens these days with the phones and the amount of stimulation that's occurring from external, from phones, TVs, etc. It's just almost like there's just not that time to get in that state because people are so attached to the external exciting stuff.
I have to ask a question for a number of athletes. I've had asked this, and I'm sure you have. So you're telling me to switch off, Maisie or Shona? You're telling me to switch off. What about video games and gaming? Where does that fit into recovery?
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing more and more is that is not recovery. It's the opposite of recovery. It's cognitively demanding, and it's also can be, athletes are competitive, right? They're not playing to relax. They're playing to win. And so I think I was giving you an example of chatting to athletes before Paris. There was one athlete who just couldn't work out why they still slept out on a day off. Why? Turned out this athlete was gaming for hours and hours and hours on that day. Like, oh no, I don't do caffeine. I'm not training late. I'm not, not napping, gaming. I'm seeing it more and more. And I think it's a real risk to, one, it just creeps into sleep time. 2, it's really cognitive demanding. 3, can you do something better with your time? You'll learn something.
And the sympathetic nervous system, when you enter a
they get excited.
game, heart rate's up, cortisol levels up, you're getting ready to perform.
It's not recovery. It might be something that really distracts you from the real world, but I would say it's one of the poorest forms. I would rather someone watch TV than video game.
Well, if you can't change it, use it to leverage what you're doing. So let's go to virtual reality.
See what I did there? Yeah. Totally nailed that.
What are you seeing in this space?
I'm from a recovery sleep angle. There's quite a bit of interest in virtual reality. So particularly obviously the immersive environment stuff. So if you're someone that, and this is me, if someone says, Shona, imagine yourself walking on a beach and imagine that for half an hour, that ain't going to happen. I'll be somewhere else. But if I put a VR headset on and it's tracking me in terms of, I'm moving through this immersive environment with VR, that is something that I could do that will definitely, and whether it's this detachment, and we talk about this a lot with sleep, that for the people that can't meditate, they're not into that, or they can't do it, give them something, a distraction or something alternative to take their brain off the things that is stressing them out, can be important. So I do think there'll be VR for, just recovery, sleep, in terms of because sometimes with sleep, you can't get a bigger duration of sleep. You just can't. Your world is your world, but maybe you can improve the quality of your sleep by doing something like VR before you go to bed that helps get you into a deeper state of sleep throughout the night.
A physiotherapist, a rehabilitation physiotherapist called Johnny King at Leicester City Football Club, they're using VR now in athlete rehabilitation, particularly for ACL injuries, which an ACL it's a season. Right? It used to be a year. They got it down to 9 months. So I think with faster acclimatation, anything quicker than 9 months is a bonus. Johnny says one of the key benefits of using VR is increased athlete engagement. The interactive nature of VR makes rehab much more enjoyable, helping maintain motivation during lengthy recovery periods. The platform also facilitates competition through leaderboards, further driving athlete participation. While he acknowledges that VR cannot replace physical training on the field, it serves as a valuable complement for neurocognitive conditioning.
And I recall people doing some research on that back at the AIS with the skill acquisition department, and they were actually getting athletes to look at watching videos of themselves uninjured. So they were currently injured, and they were watching videos of them performing at a very high level uninjured, and looking at the effects of that. And I believe it was in some ways effective, but absolutely these ways of trying to help athletes train when they can't, or they're unable to train at the level that they'd like to. I think VR is going to be really interesting in that space.
In our business, small business, we've got a FTE count of 6 and a few consultants. I look at the way AI is impacting our business. And I had a session this morning with one of my best mates. He works in IT, he runs an IT department for a big global company. He said in the last 3 weeks, and he's not someone who normally gets whipped by hyperbole and all the marketing stuff, but he said to me this morning over coffee, he said, Andy, what I am seeing in the last 3 weeks, he said, both excites me and scares the shit out of me. He said, AI is not just going to change, it is going to fundamentally transform the way businesses operate. And he gave me a few examples in his business. I just went, geez. So I can't help but think there's going to be an explosion in this area. And I've seen some VR headsets where you take an avatar of people. So you get Shona Halson with an avatar running, swimming, cycling, throwing, and that to facilitate coming back from injury quicker. So if you look at the brain pathways, why we say imagery works, your brain fundamentally doesn't know the difference between the imagined and the real. So when you look at the neural pathways, it's only a slight difference between when you use imagery and the real thing. So it makes sense. Does it scare and alarm you where this will go?
Yeah, a little bit. It does. And I think some of the challenges, there's lots of challenges, but I think some of the things that interest me is where people get their sources of information from, right? So,
Google.
In the past, exactly. And the problem is when, and I'm thinking, we just did a little project on, comparing a few different large language models and asking questions around sleep and jet lag, and the sleep minutes actually that they came up with weren't too bad. And we're asking them questions to give to athletes. There's a few things that were wrong, but generally not too bad. The travel and jet lag stuff was way off because there's so many nuances around travel, and that's not obviously publicly really easily available. But yeah, I do think that the future is going to be AI, and it's just using it well and using it to our advantage, and hopefully making sure that some of us are still going to have jobs at the end of it.
I still maintain that if you can engage people, educate people, move people, lead people, you're always going to have a job. But the batch processing jobs, I think they're the ones that are going to really struggle. Yeah. I know you have a number of elite athletes and sporting teams and an academic department to run. So we'll wrap, because you and I could talk about recovery and sleep until people maybe go to sleep and need some recovery. In preparation for this discussion, is there a question you thought I'd ask that I haven't? Or the flip, is there a question you want to ask or push back to me?
Yeah, look, I'm really fascinated sort of by the corporate world, and I'm really fascinated by behaviour change. I reckon people know what to do, generally speaking. It's just hard to get people to do what you want them to do, what they should do. I'm just curious as to you're obviously working with some super high level individuals, like your approach to engaging them enough to change their behaviours when they know they should, but maybe don't?
God, give me an easy one, Shona.
This is stuff I love. How do you get people? It's like sleep. People know to sleep, but how do you? What's the
Thomas will
catch?
know this. We had our weekly podcast meeting yesterday, and I said an upcoming podcast I think we can do is the science of change. Now, the model that I like is the trans-theoretical model by Proetska, Russian psychologist, that shows behaviour change will generally go from you're in different mode. You could be pre-contemplation, you don't know what you need to know, contemplation on the seesaw of ambivalence, you're getting ready to change, you've actually made the change, you've been doing it for 3 months, or you're into maintenance, so new behaviour. And then there's the relapse roundabout that we know in a structured change program, the average person will relapse 6 to 8 times. So I went to university to do a master's in coaching psychology because I was getting stuck with some of my executives and in the business I was running then, which was predominantly wellbeing and a little bit of psych and sporting teams to try and understand change. 2.5 years, actually 3 years later with a master's, I just said change is so freaking exciting, but it's also so freaking confusing. So the research shows it takes 3 months for most people to change and embed behaviour, between 3 and 6 months. However, and this is the podcast I want to do, if you are given information that if you don't change, you're going to lose a relationship, lose a job, or potentially lose your life, I think you can change like that. So the biggest thing that I'll use when I'm working with someone to change is what is the emotional conduit and have you got skin in the game? Now, smoking cessation, I don't talk about smoking much on the podcast because there's not much good about smoking, but the smoking cessation campaign, every time you give up smoking, you're one step closer to giving up for good, uses that research of Proetska to show that you will relapse. It's a perfectly normal, healthy part of the behaviour change process. So building in change, everyone's different. So when I zoom out, when someone's wanting to change an individual or a team or albeit an organisation, are they in pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, new behaviour, maintenance, or in relapse? That's why it's so freaking complex when you're trying to change a team because they're all in different areas. But that's why you then get leaders, like coaches doing recovery is going to make a much bigger difference for teams doing recovery because you're embedding that behaviour and you've got positive reinforcement. I better wrap up. You
can just keep talking to me about that. I've listened for hours.
So
it's interesting
it's
stuff.
finding out where people are, one, or teams, and then two, what's the emotional conduit or the motivation? And this is my learning, not from psych, but from working with thousands of people over the years, is then interpreting it and making it palatable. So if you heard some of the conversations I have and my team do with athletes, there's a lot of swearing and different terminology, like not overdoing it, but just talking in people's language. I think that's something that I've really learned the last few years to then interpret it to their level. So to run an aperture, so do you make it high level, evidence-based, quite cerebral, mid-range sticky, or do you just keep it really simple because someone's quite overloaded and they just need the basic concepts?
So interesting. Yeah. I love all of it. And I think understanding, meeting people where they're at, knowing where they're at and how to target it is just so important.
Would you add anything to that with your experience?
No, I think that's really, and I must admit that's something that I'm starting to learn and starting to get interested in. And because knowing that probably in the past, I've thought, well, you just educate people. You just got to tell them what to do. And I'm like, that's not even close to being what you need to do. I'm seeing over and over again, and we did a little project where we looked at monitoring sleep and a bit of education where it provided some good education around sleep. The players got better and better and better. And then we stopped, we walked away and they went back to where they started from. And so it was this idea of it's not just education. We know that. How do we get them to act
the emotional
on
conduit?
It?
The biggest learning I had, because I came from sport as an athlete, assistant coach at the Institute of Sport, working in cricket, working in AFL, into the corporate world. I couldn't understand them. Now I am one of them. I think I'm bilingual. I'm from locker room to boardroom. The difference with an athlete, you've got 11, 15, 18, 4, 1, 2 in a team. So they're freaking motivated to do everything you say most times to get a competitive edge. Whereas if you're in an executive team and you don't do what you and I say, you're not going to get dropped or you're not going to get out of the team. The biggest thing I find with the corporate world or working with normal people is your why, or how's this going to help you?
Yeah. I think about that for myself. I think they're the things that are going to work, right?
I thoroughly enjoyed this. I was genuinely looking forward to it. We could go down lots of rabbit holes, and we'll definitely do another couple of podcasts. But thank you. I think the information today, not just for athletes, not just for coaches, but the utility for all of our audience. Recovery has been the missing piece, and it's a huge area that most people can really improve.
No, I completely agree. And it's exciting, fun things for me to talk about because it's all the good stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew.